Well, today I just wanted to comment on something that I hear periodically from clients when they get into recovery. And that is they go to a psychiatrist and they have the symptoms of bipolar disorder. So they get very manic, then they get depressed, and they get diagnosed with bipolar disorder, put on medication. But then they begin to realize that, hey, this is complex trauma in my life. This is how my complex trauma worked out. It actually looks like bipolar disorder. I think I was misdiagnosed. And so sadly, that happens. If the psychiatrist isn't aware of kind of the trauma aspects that can look like bipolar disorder, there can be a misdiagnosis. So I want to talk about that and just explain it and then kind of help you know where to go next if you've struggled with this. So bipolar disorder used to be called manic depressive, and now we have what we call bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. So bipolar 1 is the red line, and it goes to kind of extreme mania, where you just feel wonderful. You can even get kind of to almost a psychotic place. You got tons of energy. You think thoughts of great grandeur about yourself. But then you can go to this depressed state and deep, deep depression. And it can last for quite a while. And so there's all kinds of stuff in the DSM about kind of how many days and the cycles that happen around that. So that's bipolar 1. Bipolar 2 is the blue line. And so you don't go to the extreme mania, you go to what's called hypomania. So you have an increase in energy a bit, but not to the extreme mania phase. But you still have the depression stuff. So those are the two types of bipolar disorder. So it's important to understand when it comes to complex trauma, the research that's come out around dopamine in the brain. So dopamine in the brain, what they've realized is it follows a very similar sign graph. So if you go through a really pleasurable experience that has a great release of dopamine in your brain. So let's say you go to a concert and it just blows your mind, or you go to your child's wedding, it's beautiful, it just blows your mind, or you go to a retreat and it's just an amazing experience and you felt so connected and alive and you get this rush of dopamine. Usually what happens is your brain, and this is what the research is showing us, your brain then must recover. And so it actually dips and it looks a wee bit like you feel flat. You feel a bit down. You feel almost like a bit of a hangover after this mountaintop high experience. There's a valley that has to follow where your brain gets rested and rebalanced and ready to go again. So that is how our brains work when it comes to dopamine. Think of a person who listens to a song and the song gives them goosebumps and the song takes them just to this place of euphoria, ecstasy. It's a wonderful experience. So what do? They listen to the song again. They listen to the song again. 2-3 days in a row, they just listen to that song over and over again. And it just keeps taking them to this emotional place. And all of a sudden, the next day, the song almost turns them off. They listen to the song and it's just like they're almost repulsed by it and I don't want to listen to it anymore. Why? Because the brain says, I need to rest from constantly pumping out dopamine. I need to stop so that I can get balanced again. So what I want you to see is if you look at the bipolar disorder graph and then you look at a dopamine graph, whoa, they kind of look the same. And so let's take now our body, our nervous system is designed to operate like the dopamine curve where we're in our sympathetic nervous system and there's energy there. And then we go to our parasympathetic nervous system and rest. And our body finds this balance. So we got two systems in our body, dopamine and our central nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, that work like a sine curve. Now let's bring in complex trauma. So what happens in complex trauma is I'm in danger, perceived danger, so I'm in my sympathetic nervous system all the time. And I go there all the time. I'm hypervigilant. I'm on guard. I've got extra energy ready to fight or flight because cortisol is pumping in my brain. And so all of that looks like mania because I'm up there. I got energy. I can go, go, go. I don't feel like sleeping. And then all of a sudden, my brain goes, we got to crash now because I can't stay in this sympathetic nervous system. And so they crash and they just want to sleep for a couple of days. And it looks like depression. They feel rotten. And you go, oh, they've got bipolar disorder. No, they've got complex trauma. And that's how the two nervous systems work together in complex trauma. Another way the nervous system works in complex trauma is people who their whole value has come from hard work. And so now they get to adult life and they just push themselves into their sympathetic nervous system all the time. If they relax, they feel guilty. They feel selfish. So they go, 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 and they dig deeper and they push until the brain says, we can't do this anymore, and they burn out and they crash. Now, if you look at that, again, they push. They got tons of energy. They look manic because they can go, 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 and often even without sleep. And then when they crash and burn out, it looks like depression. And so complex trauma creates the dynamics that look like bipolar disorder just because of the nervous system. Let me take it further into addiction. So what happens for a person in complex trauma is they're living with all of these unmet needs, which is causing them pain. They're getting hurt and they can't resolve it. They're living with these painful emotions of fear and anger, loss that they can't resolve. And so these negative emotions, they just can't resolve. And so what do? I need to numb them. I need to escape them. And they find drugs. Or they find dissociating activities that just take me away from living in my own skin, from living in the present. So I'm busy all the time. I go into a fantasy world. I play video games. I eat food, have sex, whatever takes me out of the present. And then they find drugs and alcohol and they go, I found the perfect solution to all of my unresolved emotional pain. Well, all of those activities and drugs and alcohol release dopamine in the brain. And drugs and alcohol release large quantities of dopamine in the brain. And they go, whoa, this feels so good. And now, once they get that shot of dopamine, they've got extra energy. They can go without sleep. They just want to keep going and going because they get this burst of energy and it looks like they're manic. But then they come down off the drug, they stop using it, and then they crash. And they go to a state where it feels like they're depressed. And so what happens if the person continues to use the drugs, let's say, the brain doesn't get a chance to crash. They just keep using and using and using. The brain develops a tolerance. And it gets to the point where it changes chemically where they don't feel pleasure at all. They now take the drug just to try to feel normal. And so they just feel dead. They feel empty. It's just like they're in that depressed state constantly, even though they're using. And so what I want you to realize is, again, complex trauma, because of either the dopamine system or the central nervous system, has pushed a person to activities or behaviors that mimic bipolar disorder. So let me take it a little bit farther. So let's say this person comes into adult life and they seem fairly stable a lot of the time, but then they get triggered. And all of a sudden, in a heartbeat, their mood shifts. So something has triggered an old wound that some relationship thing today has triggered something from the past, from a relationship wound. And now within a nanosecond, because of the trigger, they can go to anger, they can go to ranting, they can go to endless energy. They can't sleep. They just want to go. And it's just like there's a different person that comes out, and you go, wow, it's almost like a manic state. And then after they come out of that, then they go to hating themselves. They go to feeling hopeless about life, and it looks like depressed state. And so again, triggers can set off behaviors in the here and now that look manic and then depressed. And then there's another thing that comes out of complex trauma. Part of what happens in complex trauma is you don't have a co-regulator to help you learn how to regulate your emotions, because you can't connect securely to mom and dad. And so you don't have somebody that's helping you learn to regulate your emotions. So now you have to learn your own ways of self-soothing. Some might be healthy, but many are unhealthy. And so for some people, they self-soothe by eating, by sex, by overspending. All of that helps them feel a little better. Some self-soothe by self-harm. So what happens when they self-soothe is, while they're self-soothing, it makes them feel better. And that can look manic. But then as soon as they stop, then they crash and they feel terrible about themselves. There's one final thing that can happen that comes out of complex trauma that can get confused. And that is, complex trauma creates this emotional numbness. I can't resolve all these painful emotions, so I'll just suppress them. I'll just end up being numb. Who needs emotions? I'll escape into my head. And so there's just this emptiness, numbness inside when it comes to emotions. That can look like depression. That's your constant state. Then once in a while you find a pleasurable activity and you get excited and you get a shot of dopamine and away you go. And you go, wow, that was quite a roller coaster swing. But that's your normal, as you swing from this constant down, numb state that looks like depression to the odd outburst of energy and pleasure. So if you can relate to this, and you go, wow, now I think what I was diagnosed as bipolar disorder, I think I just been living out my complex trauma. Sadly, I've seen that happen with many people. And some of the sad consequences of being misdiagnosed is you get a treatment that doesn't help. So they put you on antidepressants, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, instead of giving you trauma therapy. And so if you're not dealing with the actual trauma, you're not going to get the help. And so your symptoms are going to persist despite the medication. And that can be so frustrating. And then you get labeled. Oh, you got bipolar disorder, and all of your ongoing struggles and other issues are invalidated and said, oh, that's just your brain chemicals. You can get really confused by that. You have identity confusion because of that, because you got a label now, and it's just very difficult. So what do you do if you've been misdiagnosed? Number one, maybe you haven't even been diagnosed yet. You just see fluctuations like yourself, and you go, I wonder if I got bipolar. If you go to a psychiatrist, go to somebody who understands complex trauma. Because it's so easy for a psychiatrist to just look at your symptoms and go, yeah, that's bipolar disorder, without exploring whether you have trauma, without exploring all the stuff I've just talked about. If you have been diagnosed with bipolar, and maybe you actually do have bipolar, I would suspect there's still some complex trauma issues that are part of it as well. And I would really encourage you to get help in understanding complex trauma. I just think it's going to help you overall. And so part of what a person in recovery from these fluctuations from complex trauma has to realize is balance between my sympathetic and my parasympathetic. Boundaries when I'm feeling good, not to just run away with it and let go on a dopamine ride. I need boundaries where I say, no, that's enough for today. Now I have to get my consistent amount of sleep. So you need good internal boundaries, and it's realizing that I got to learn to meet all my 12 needs. I can't just live off of dopamine. That will eventually fail. I have to learn to meet all of my 12 needs so I get true joy in my life. I just appreciate that people show up. They're on a healing journey. They're learning, they're listening, they're applying tools. And what many find is that the YouTube channel is very helpful to them, but it seems like it only takes their healing so far. And they start to feel a bit stuck. And so what we've done is provided other things that people can do that will take their healing even farther. So we have our LIFT program, which is very in-depth, intense, 75 modules that you take with a group of people where you're digging into understanding complex trauma and healing. There's watching videos, a group environment, a coach, and it's a wonderful, wonderful journey for people. So LIFT, if you're interested, is something that's available. For others, they're not quite ready for that yet, so we have our Align courses, self-study courses that you can do bite-sized topical stuff, or you can do the LIFT course on your own as a self-study course. I don't want to put pressure on anybody. This is your healing journey. I just want to make you aware of some of the extra things that we have come up with to try to help people in their journey of recovery. Thank you.